Paul from Embroidery Source and AS Digital, and today we're going to take a look at the ESD CAP TBH cap press. TBH for top and bottom heat. So caps being made with thicker materials, sometimes with seams. It's important to make sure that we get the right heat applied to the cap for correct application of our logos. So I'll quickly go through the setup of the TBH press. It's very simple to change. So first thing is we touch the set button and you can see the upper heat light is flashing. So now we can use the up or down arrow keys to adjust the heat. So for DTF transfers, typically we're using about 160 degrees. On the second press of the button, it changes to the lower heat. We also have that set on 160. On the next press, it changes to the number of seconds. Once again, caps being a thicker material, sometimes with seams, it's important to make sure we get the time right to allow the heat to transfer from the upper and lower platens into the cap. And then on the next press of set, changes to the temperature scale, centigrade or Fahrenheit. We always leave it on centigrade. And finally, on the last press, we're back to the operating condition. You'll notice on the bottom right hand side there's a production counter. I just reset it a minute ago, so it's only set on 2. So you can zero the production counter if you have 50 caps to do. The counter will tell you how many you've done, and then to clear the counter you simply press and hold the cross button at the bottom, and that will set the counter back to 0. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is cap styles and the optional bottom platens that come with your TBH cap press. So we have three. We have three lower platens that come with the cap press. This is the largest size, and then we have smaller sizes, and you'll notice that they're also a different shape. And the reason for that is, as you probably know, is that not all caps are the same size or the same style. So it's really important to choose the lower platen that suits or your cap fits onto perfectly for best results. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Flexfit cap, which you're probably all familiar with already, and I'll show you how we fit that onto the press. So we pull the sweatband out to the front. You'll see there's a lip here. We pull the sweatband out to the front, and at the back here we have a tensioning device. So it goes into the back of the cap and just holds it down. So now it's important to make sure that the cap is centered, and you see we have a laser positioning guide here on this press that shows us the center of the cap. So I'm lining that up perfectly with the center of the cap. And the next thing is to make sure that my peak seam is slotted into this little position on the front of the platen here. This means that the seam will be parallel. So my cap is on, my laser is centered, my press area is good. That's a perfect fit for this cap. And now, because of the different styles of caps, not all caps have the same radius or the same profile. And for this particular platen, we use a special heat pressing cover. And you can see here on the heat pressing cover that it's not all the same thickness. It's thin in the middle and it's thicker on the sides. So that helps it to press more evenly on the sides of the cap. So I'm going to place that on the cap, and I'm going to close the cap press. And the next step is also important. When you're pressing caps, because of the uneven thickness, you have seams in the middle sometimes, you have thinner cap material at the side, you need to make sure that the pressure applied to the cap is enough to press the thinner parts of the cap just as much as it's pressing on the thicker seam. So it's important to make sure you have enough pressure applied. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to close the cap press, and I'm going to leave it closed to ensure that this pad is heated up. With all heat presses, it's really important to make sure that the top and bottom parts of the press are hot before you start your first press operation. If any part of the press is cold, then the first press operation of the day might not be effective. It might not stick properly. So I've warmed it up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my logo, and of course you also have to make sure that your logos are the right size to fit on the available area on the cap. So I'm going to center that one on the cap there, and then the next thing I'm going to do, I've pre-cut some tape here, and I'm going to use the tape to position my transfer on the cap and stick it down. Now I'm going to do that on this particular cap. I'm going to do it both at the top and the bottom, because what happens is when the press opens, DTF transfer film has a tendency to try and flatten itself out as soon as the cap press opens. Now we don't want that to happen, because if the transfer film lifts too soon while the adhesive is still melted, you're going to have problems with adherence to the cap. So I'm using 3 pieces of heat tape to tape my transfer down as well as I can. Put my cover sheet on, and now I'm going to close the press. So it's set for 20 seconds, and you would experiment with this on your cap press, depending on the style of cap. If you're using a trucker cap with a flat foam front, or a low profile cap with a center seam, you would need to adjust your timing to suit the cap that you're using. Okay, so that was my press. Now the next thing is, because caps are a much thicker material than say a t-shirt or a polo shirt, they retain a lot of heat. So what we have to do now is take the cap off and allow it to cool down. We don't want to peel this transfer while the cap is still really, really hot, because if we do that, there's a chance that the transfer will lift. And so I'm just going to cool that down a bit. If you have an old garment or a t-shirt or something that you can rub the surface with, that all helps. So now that we've pressed and removed the transfer film from a cap, it's always good practice, as most people do with a garment, to press the item a second time after you've removed the cover sheet. So I'm going to pop the cap back into the press again. We don't have to be quite so fussy this time. And you can see here that with the TBH press, you get both this cover sheet with the thicker sides, but we also get a sheet of thin heat transfer foam. So this time we can just pop that on the top of the cap, close the press again. Doesn't have to be 20 seconds this time, but this second press just ensures that if any tiny areas of your transfer didn't adhere fully the first time, this time we're heat pressing it a second time just to make sure. So I can open the press now, remove that cover sheet. It's quite hot because this foam is designed to transfer heat very quickly. We take a cap off, and then we have the finished transfer. Now, of course, you should always remember that caps with center seams, transferring something over that center seam, because the very center of the seam is lower than the rest of the cap. So that can be a bit tricky. So you need to know your product. You need to do some testing so that you know the best time and temperature and the best pressure for each of the products that you're likely to heat press. Okay, so now we're going to heat press a bucket hat. These are a little bit easier than a cap because typically bucket hats, they don't have seams, they're softer, thinner material, so they're a little bit more forgiving than some of the caps that we have to deal with. So I'm going to put it on. We've changed our platen over to a slightly larger size. Put my tensioning device in the back. I'm going to pull my bucket hat seam to the front so that I'm not pressing on, not the seam, but the sweatband. So I'm not pressing on top of the sweatband. And I'm going to pull my bucket hat seam forward. Don't think I've put that on very straight, and there we go. The eyelets on both sides. Okay. So we need to try and get our front seam parallel. Okay. And as always, I like to heat press the product before I actually put the logo on. So I'm just going to put a standard piece of foam on there, close the press, take note of where the front of the heated platen is in relationship to the seam, because if you have your logo too far to the front, it's not going to be heat pressed. We need to make sure the logo is within the heated area of the bucket hat. Just pull that a little bit further to the back. Okay, take our transfer, we put it on central with a laser line. I'm going to take my heat tape again, just to hold my logo in place, and say we're about right there. That should hold it down. Another one on the top and one on the bottom. You may find you don't need 3 pieces of tape, but put my foam on the top and heat press. So probably this one won't need 20 seconds. I had it set on 20 seconds for the thicker cap. This one probably will be less, more like 10 seconds. And probably let that go now. And once again, release it from here and let it cool down. This is thinner product, so this will cool down fairly quickly. Oop, here we go. There's my transfer on the bucket hat, and once again we'll give it just a final heat press just to make sure we're on there. We don't have to be too fussy about how it goes onto the platen this time. Put the foam on, give it another press. Probably only 5 seconds this time, should be heaps. Okay, and there we have our bucket hat. So just to recap on everything that we've already covered, the first thing is make sure that your temperatures are set correctly, make sure that your time is set correctly, and for thicker products like caps, you probably will need to increase the dwell time to let the heat transfer fully into the transfer and into the cap itself. Make sure you choose the right platen for the size and style of product that you're pressing. There is no one platen that fits all caps and all styles, so it's really important you choose the right bottom platen. Make sure you have heated both the top and bottom platens right up to temperature. I like to pre-press the product before I put the transfer on, and you'll recall that I used heat tape to hold the heat transfer not only in position, but to stop the transfer film from trying to flatten out as soon as the press opens. If it flattens out, if it lifts too soon, there's always a possibility the transfer is going to lift with it. So leave the heat tape on, let the product cool down, peel the transfer, and then I like to put it back in the press again for a final press, which is probably only 5 seconds, just to make sure that we're securely attached to the product. And that's caps and buckets hats using the ESD CAP TBH, top and bottom heat.